The mistress shoves a cake in the pregnant wife's face in front of high society, while the husband laughs and kicks her out of his life. Years later, the same humiliated woman returns as a powerful executive, and the help she offers her old rival becomes the night's biggest twist. If you love stories like this, watch till the end, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment letting us know where you're listening from. The ballroom of the Metropolitan Club was filled with distinguished guests that Saturday night. Crystals glittered under the golden light of imported chandeliers, and the murmur of conversations mingled with the discreet sound of the chamber orchestra. Megan Wallace adjusted her navy blue silk dress for the 10th time, trying to conceal her 7-month baby bump. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a glass of orange juice, watching from afar as her husband, Richard "Rick" Wallace, moved effortlessly through the room, greeting businessmen and politicians with that confident smile she knew so well. The charity gala had been hosted by the Wallace family for 3 generations. It was a tradition for the heir's wife to organize every detail, and Megan had spent months planning every aspect of the evening. The flowers had been flown in from California, the menu crafted by a renowned chef, and even the entertainment had been carefully selected. Everything was perfect. At least, it was supposed to be. Megan felt a knot in her stomach when she saw Rick approach the main table, accompanied by a woman she knew all too well, Jessica Vance, his partner at the investment firm, the woman with whom he spent more and more hours at the office, always with excuses about important deals and complex contracts. Megan wasn't naive. The late-night calls, the different perfumes she smelled on his shirts, the glances he exchanged with Jessica at social events, it all pointed to a truth she was desperately trying to ignore, especially now that she was carrying the first grandchild of the Wallace family. Jessica was everything Megan wasn't. Tall, slender, with sleek black hair that fell perfectly over her shoulders, always dressed in tight, elegant clothes that accentuated her curves. At 42, she looked 10 years younger thanks to expensive cosmetic treatments and a strict workout routine. Megan, on the other hand, felt clumsy in her body, transformed by pregnancy, with swollen ankles and a rounder face. At 35, she felt like she had aged a decade in the last few months. The tension in the air was palpable. Megan saw Jessica run a hand possessively up Rick's arm, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh a little too loudly. A few guests began to notice the intimacy between them, and discreet whispers spread through the ballroom like a silent fire. Megan took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. She was a Wallace now, and the Wallaces didn't show weakness in public, but what happened next crossed every line of cruelty. The moment to cut the charity cake had arrived, a tradition where the host's wife made the first slice and offered it for a symbolic auction, with the money going to that year's chosen charity. Megan walked to the central table, where a 3-tiered cake decorated with sugar flowers awaited her. She picked up the silver knife with its mother-of-pearl handle, smiling for the photographers documenting the moment. That's when Jessica approached. She said nothing at first, just stood beside Megan so close their shoulders touched. Megan tried to step away discreetly, but Jessica followed, maintaining the uncomfortable proximity. Then, in a move that seemed to happen in slow motion, Jessica grabbed a generous piece of the cake with her bare hands, and in front of everyone smeared the sweet concoction directly onto Megan's dress. The silence that followed was absolute. The orchestra stopped playing. Conversations ceased instantly. Every eye in the room turned to the surreal scene unfolding before them. Megan stood frozen, feeling the frosting run down the expensive fabric, staining the dress she had chosen so carefully. Her hands instinctively shielded her belly, as if she could protect her baby from the humiliation she was suffering. Jessica wiped her hands on a napkin with disturbing calm, her face displaying a cruel smile of satisfaction. But the worst was yet to come. Megan turned to Rick, expecting him to defend her, to put that woman in her place, to show everyone that there was still some respect between them. What she saw in his eyes, however, was something far worse than indifference. It was complicity. Rick walked over to Jessica and wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close in a gesture of protection and possession. Megan felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. He was choosing. Right there, in front of all of Manhattan's elite, in front of his family, in front of the friends she considered her own, Rick was choosing his mistress over his pregnant wife. Tears burned in Megan's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not there. Not in front of all those people who were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She lifted her chin, trying to maintain some dignity, but Rick's words shattered her completely. "You never knew how to act at these events, Megan. Always so awkward, so plain. I think it's best if you leave. The security guards will help you out discreetly." His voice was cold, calculated, as if he were dismissing an incompetent employee and not the woman with whom he had exchanged wedding vows 3 years earlier. Megan looked around, searching for a friendly face, someone who would intervene, who would say this was outrageous. But she found only averted gazes and complicit silence. New York high society had chosen its side, and it wasn't hers. 2 security guards approached, and Megan realized she had no choice. She walked to the exit with her head held high, even as she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her, even as she heard the whispers resume as soon as she passed. The cake-stained dress left a sweet, sticky trail on the ballroom's red carpet. When the doors closed behind her, cutting off the sound of the orchestra that had started playing again, Megan finally allowed the tears to roll down her face. She stood there on the cold sidewalk of Fifth Avenue, watching the luxury cars parked, the uniformed chauffeurs waiting patiently for their employers. The baby kicked inside her, as if protesting the whole situation. Megan placed her hands on her belly, feeling the life growing there, the innocent child who was not to blame for any of this. A taxi pulled up beside her, and the driver looked at her with a genuinely concerned expression. "Mom, are you okay? Do you need help?" Megan got into the car without answering, giving the address of the Wallace townhouse on the Upper East Side. But when she arrived 20 minutes later, she discovered the locks had been changed. Her suitcases were at the doorman station, unceremoniously piled next to a few boxes containing her personal belongings. The doorman, embarrassed, handed her an envelope. Inside was a short, direct letter from Rick. He wanted a divorce. Alimony would be negotiated through lawyers. She should find another place to live. The joint bank accounts had been frozen. Megan read the words once, twice, 3 times, trying to process the scale of the betrayal. It wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the end of everything she knew, of the entire life she had built. In the following days, Megan discovered the extent of Rick's planning. He had prepared everything in advance, ensuring she was left without resources, without support, without anything. Her own family, who had always disapproved of the marriage, considering the Wallaces too arrogant, refused to help her. They said she had made her choice by marrying against their wishes, and now she had to face the consequences. Megan spent the next few weeks in a cheap motel in Queens, surviving on the little money she had saved in an old personal account. The pregnancy was advancing, and she needed to find a way to survive. Rick's lawyers were ruthless, dragging out the divorce proceedings and denying any temporary support. She was alone, pregnant, and without prospects. The birth took place at a public hospital in the city, far from the luxury maternity ward where she had planned to deliver. It was a difficult, painful, lonely birth. No family was present. No friends came to visit. When the nurse placed the baby in her arms, a beautiful boy with dark eyes and black hair, Megan cried for the first time since that night at the Metropolitan Club. But they weren't tears of sadness. It was determination. She looked at that innocent little face and made a silent promise. Her son would have a better life. She would find a way. She named the boy Michael after her own paternal grandfather, a man she had never known but who, according to stories, was honorable and hard-working. In the following months, Megan discovered a strength within herself she never knew she possessed. She found a small 1-bedroom apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens, a humble area but filled with hard-working, honest people. To pay the rent and bills, she took any job she could find. During the day, Megan cleaned houses on Park Avenue and the Upper East Side, a cruel irony that brought her back to the neighborhoods where she used to move as a socialite. At night, she worked as a janitor in office buildings downtown, bringing Michael in a stroller because she had no one to leave him with. The hands that were once soft and cared for with weekly manicures were now rough and calloused. The body that once frequented exclusive gyms was now constantly sore from heavy physical labor. But it was at one of these night jobs that Megan's destiny began to change. She had gotten a position with the cleaning company that serviced one of the largest corporate conglomerates in the country, Sterling Enterprises. The building was imposing, 30 floors of glass and steel on Wall Street, the financial heart of New York. Megan worked the graveyard shift from 2 to 7 in the morning, cleaning the offices while the city slept. It was a Thursday night when Megan entered the executive suite on the top floor to do her routine cleaning. She was allowed in all the offices, but always did so with respect and care, never touching anything more than necessary. That night, she noticed documents spread across the conference table, complex spreadsheets and charts that caught her eye. Before marrying Rick, Megan had graduated with a business degree from Wharton, one of the best universities in the country. She understood numbers and corporate strategy. Her eyes scanned the documents almost automatically, and she noticed a serious error in one of the financial projections. The calculation was inverted, which could result in a multi-million-dollar loss for the company if not corrected. Megan hesitated for a moment, but her training and her honest nature won out. She picked up a pen from the table and made a discreet note in the margin of the document, pointing out the error and suggesting the correction. She was so focused that she didn't hear the footsteps approaching. When she realized, it was too late. A woman of about 60 was standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. Megan recognized her immediately. Beatrice Sterling, the legendary founder and CEO of the conglomerate, one of the most powerful and feared women in the American business world. Known for her sharp intellect, impeccable business sense, and absolute intolerance for incompetence. Megan felt her blood run cold. She had tampered with confidential documents. She would surely be fired, maybe even sued. She held the pen with trembling hands, ready to apologize, to beg for her job when Beatrice spoke. "What are you doing?" The voice was stern, but there was curiosity in it too. Megan explained the error she had found, her voice coming out firmer than she expected. She showed the calculations, explained her reasoning, demonstrated the necessary correction. Beatrice walked to the table, picked up the documents, and analyzed Megan's notes for long minutes that felt like an eternity. Then, for the first time in years, Megan saw something she didn't expect. A smile. It wasn't a warm or friendly smile, but there was recognition in it. Recognition of competence, of intelligence, of value. Beatrice looked at Megan, really looked, seeing beyond the grey janitor's uniform, beyond the calloused hands and the exhaustion etched on her face. "Sit down. We need to talk." And Megan, without knowing exactly why, obeyed. She sat in that Italian leather chair across from the most powerful woman she had ever met, and began to tell her story. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. She spoke of her education, of how she had lost everything, of the young son waiting for her. At home, Beatrice listened in silence, her blue eyes studying every detail of Megan's face, as if reading a complete story in each expression. When Megan finished, Beatrice asked a single question. "If I offered you a chance to rebuild your life, to become someone no one could ever ignore again, would you have the courage to take it?" Megan didn't have to think long. She looked at this woman who represented everything she wanted to be, strength, power, independence, and said the only word that mattered. "Yes." Beatrice nodded, satisfied. "Then be back here tomorrow at 6 p.m. And don't be late." Megan left that office with her heart pounding, not knowing exactly what had just happened, but feeling that something fundamental had changed. For the first time since that terrible night at the Metropolitan Club, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. The game had begun, and she finally had an ally. Megan arrived at the Sterling Enterprises building at exactly 6 p.m., wearing the best outfit she owned, a simple but clean set of black pants and a white blouse. Michael was with her neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, a kind elderly woman who had offered to watch the boy for a few hours when Megan explained she had an important meeting. Her heart pounded as the elevator ascended to the 30th floor. She didn't know what to expect, but she was determined to seize whatever opportunity Beatrice Sterling might offer. Beatrice's assistant, an elegant middle-aged woman named Susan, greeted her with a professional but not unfriendly expression. "You can go in. Ms. Sterling is waiting for you." Megan took a deep breath and opened the office door. The room was impressive, with marble floors, Italian designer furniture, and a breathtaking panoramic view of New York City. Beatrice was sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, examining documents with reading glasses perched on her nose. She gestured for Megan to sit. "For the last 24 hours, I've been investigating your life, Megan Wallace," Beatrice said bluntly, removing her glasses and fixing her piercing blue eyes on Megan. "I know everything about your disastrous marriage to Richard Wallace, about the public humiliation you suffered, about how he left you with nothing while you were pregnant. I also discovered that you graduated with honors from Wharton, that you had a promising career cut short when you married, and that for the past few months you've been working 3 different jobs to support your son alone." Megan felt her face flush, a mix of shame at having her story exposed and surprise at the efficiency of Beatrice's investigation. But she held her gaze steady, waiting for what would come next. Beatrice stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "I also discovered something interesting about your ex-husband. His company, Wallace Investments, is in financial trouble. He's made risky and reckless investments over the last 2 years, trying to prove something to his late father. He's on the verge of bankruptcy, but he hides it very well from society." Megan felt a strange pang in her chest, a mix of satisfaction knowing Rick wasn't doing as well as he appeared, and concern for what that meant. Beatrice turned to her. "I need someone with 3 specific qualities: intelligence, motivation, and invisibility. You have all 3. No one in Manhattan's elite remembers you anymore, Megan. You've become irrelevant to them, disposable, and that's exactly what I need." Beatrice's proposal was both fascinating and terrifying. She was mounting a complex operation to acquire several smaller companies and consolidate her empire, but she was facing resistance from a group of businessmen trying to block her moves. Among those businessmen was, coincidentally, Rick Wallace. He had joined a consortium trying to halt the expansion of Sterling Enterprises, not out of solid business strategy, but out of pride and masculine competitiveness. Beatrice needed someone who could infiltrate the social circles of these businessmen, gather information, identify weaknesses and opportunities. "I'll be clear with you, Megan," Beatrice said, sitting back down and leaning her elbows on the desk. "This isn't charity. I'm not offering you a regular job. I'm offering you a chance at a complete transformation. If you accept, you will spend the next 6 months in intensive training. You'll learn everything about the high-level corporate world, about negotiation, strategy, market intelligence. You will relearn how to walk, talk, and behave like someone who belongs in this world. And in the end, if you succeed, you will have not only an executive position in my company, but also the tools and the power to never be trampled on by anyone again." Megan looked at her own hands, calloused from manual labor, and then at Beatrice. "What do you get out of this? Why me?" Beatrice smiled, a cold but honest smile. "Because I see something in you that I recognize in myself when I was young. Hunger. Not just for success or money, but to prove you exist. Besides, I have a particular aversion to men like your ex-husband. Men who build their egos by crushing women. If I can help you rebuild yourself and in the process dismantle his little empire of arrogance, it will be a very satisfying personal bonus." Megan didn't have to think long. "What do I need to do to start?" Beatrice nodded, satisfied. "Tomorrow at 8 a.m. you begin. Susan will give you the details. During this period, I will arrange for a suitable home for you and your son in a safe neighborhood and a reliable nanny. You will need all your time and energy for the training. Make no mistake, Megan. This will be harder than anything you've ever faced. I will break you, rebuild you, and in the end, you will thank me for every painful moment of this process." The next 6 months were indeed the most brutal of Megan's life. Beatrice wasn't exaggerating. The training began at 6 in the morning and often went until midnight. Megan had classes in corporate etiquette, behavior at high-level social events, body language, negotiation techniques, advanced financial analysis, business strategy, and even lessons in style and personal presentation. There were sessions with trauma-specialized psychologists so she could process the humiliation she suffered without it paralyzing her. There was intense physical training to improve her posture and presence, but the hardest part was what Beatrice called emotional immunization. Once a week, Megan was forced to mentally relive that night at the Metropolitan Club. Beatrice asked detailed questions, forcing her to describe every sensation, every thought, every moment of pain. The goal was to desensitize Megan to the memory, to transform the anger and shame into cold, controlled fuel. At first, Megan would leave these sessions crying and exhausted, but gradually something inside her began to harden. The pain didn't disappear, but it no longer controlled her. She learned to use that memory as motivation, not as a prison. Alongside her personal training, Megan spent hours studying documents about Rick and the other businessmen in the consortium, trying to block Beatrice. She memorized details about their lives, their companies, their families, their weaknesses. She discovered that Rick had taken out risky loans to maintain the appearance of success, that his relationship with Jessica was far from stable, that he was being pressured by the family company's board to produce results he couldn't deliver. Meanwhile, Michael grew up healthy and happy under the care of the nanny Beatrice had hired, a wonderful woman named Rose, who treated the boy like her own grandson. Megan felt guilty for spending so much time away from her son, but she knew she was doing it for him, for their future. On weekends, she dedicated every free minute to Michael, taking him to the park, reading him stories, making him laugh. Those moments were her anchor, reminding her why she was going through all of this. As the months passed, Megan's transformation became increasingly evident. Her hair, once haphazardly cut at home, was now styled at a top salon, taking on a modern, sophisticated cut that framed her face. Her skin, once dry from work and stress, now received regular treatments. Her body, strengthened by workouts, acquired an erect and confident posture. But the deepest change was internal. The insecure, submissive woman who accepted crumbs of her husband's attention had vanished. In her place emerged a sharp, intelligent executive who was, most importantly, impossible to ignore. In the 5th month of training, Beatrice took Megan for her first real test. A smaller charity dinner where some businessmen from Rick's circle would be present, but not Rick himself. Megan wore an elegant but discreet black dress, simple but quality jewelry, and a subtle but memorable perfume. Beatrice introduced her as her new protégé, a strategic consultant helping with some special projects. The cover story was that Megan had spent years working abroad and was just returning to the States. During dinner, Megan conversed with several businessmen demonstrating a knowledge of the financial market and corporate strategy that impressed everyone. She was charming without being seductive, intelligent without being intimidating, interesting without being invasive. No one recognized her. Why would they? The pregnant, humiliated woman from years ago had nothing in common with the confident executive before them. At the end of the night, Beatrice pulled her aside. "You passed the test. You're ready for the next level." The 6th month was dedicated to a complete immersion in the world Megan would need to infiltrate. She attended increasingly exclusive social events, always by Beatrice's side, expanding her network of contacts, making herself known in the right circles. She learned to detect when someone was lying, when they were desperate, when they were vulnerable. She learned the subtle art of corporate manipulation, how to plant ideas in people's minds and make them believe they were their own. She learned to be patient, to wait for the right moment, to not show her hand too early. Beatrice also introduced her to the more technical aspects of the business world she would need to master. Megan spent weeks with the company's top corporate lawyers, learning about contracts, acquisitions, mergers, and the 1,000 legal ways to dismantle a business adversary. She studied famous cases of hostile takeovers, of companies that fell due to a single strategic mistake, of empires built and destroyed by seemingly small decisions. There was also an aspect of the plan that Beatrice kept partially veiled. Megan knew it wasn't just about dismantling the consortium trying to block Beatrice. There was something more personal to it. One afternoon, Beatrice finally revealed the full context. 20 years ago, Rick's father, Maurice Wallace, tried to destroy me when I was an up-and-coming entrepreneur. He used dirty tactics, spread rumors about my competence, tried to bribe my clients. I survived, but I never forgot. Rick is the last of the Wallaces. The company is faltering because he doesn't have his father's talent, only his arrogance. This is the perfect time to close a chapter. Megan then understood that she wasn't just a piece on Beatrice's chessboard, she was an ally in a much longer war. And strangely, that comforted her. It meant Beatrice had skin in the game too, that she wasn't just using Megan as a disposable pawn. Their interests were aligned, and Megan had learned from Beatrice that the best partnerships are those where both parties have something to gain. On the last day of the 6th month, Beatrice summoned Megan for a final meeting before what she called the official debut. They met in the office, and Beatrice placed a thick dossier on the table. This is everything we have on your ex-husband and the other members of the consortium, financial, personal, business information. You will memorize every detail. In 3 weeks, the annual art gala and auction at MoMA takes place. It's the social event of the year, and they will all be there. It will be your triumphant return to high society, but no one can recognize you immediately. The key is doubt. Let them wonder who this impressive woman is next to Beatrice Sterling. Megan took the dossier, feeling its weight in her hands. It wasn't just paper. It was power. It was information. It was ammunition. She looked at Beatrice, the woman who had transformed her life in a way she never imagined possible. Thank you for believing in me when no one else did. Beatrice nodded, but her face remained serious. Don't thank me yet, Megan. The hardest part is yet to come. At these next events, you will be face to face with the people who humiliated you. You will have to smile at them, talk to them, gain their trust, all while carrying the memory of what they did to you. If you falter, if you show weakness, everything will be lost. Can you do that? Megan thought of Michael, sleeping safely in his new home, surrounded by comfort and security. She thought of the nights she spent crying alone, cleaning bathrooms and offices while carrying a baby. She thought of that pathetic woman Rick had discarded like trash, and then she thought of the woman she had become, forged in the fire of adversity, sharpened by Beatrice's tutelage, ready to reclaim what was hers. I can do more than that. I'm looking forward to it. Beatrice smiled, and for the first time, Megan saw something that looked like genuine pride in the older woman's eyes. Then it's time for you to meet who you've truly become. Come with me. They walked to a room adjacent to the office that Megan had never entered. It was a kind of showroom with various designer clothes hanging, shoes lined up, jewelry displayed in illuminated cases. In the center of the room was a full-length mirror, surrounded by professional lights like in a theater dressing room. Wear this. Beatrice handed Megan a long, blood-red velvet gown with an elegant neckline and an impeccable cut. Megan went into the dressing room and put on the dress. When she came out and stood before the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. The dress hugged her body perfectly, enhancing every curve the physical training had sculpted. The intense red contrasted beautifully with her skin tone and dark hair, but more than the clothes or the physical appearance, it was the presence. The woman in the mirror had her shoulders back, her chin up, her eyes shining with a confidence that came from within. Beatrice stood beside her, looking at the reflection. This is who you always were, Megan. You just needed the right circumstances to emerge. Remember that when you face your ex-husband. You are no longer the woman he knew. You are someone completely new, someone he never had the capacity to understand or deserve. Use that. Megan nodded, storing that image in her memory. She was ready. The game was about to begin. And this time she wouldn't be the victim. She would be the player. The night of the annual art gala and auction at the Museum of Modern Art was flawless. The sky was clear, allowing the city lights to create a sparkling backdrop through the museum's glass walls. The most illustrious guests of New York society arrived in their luxury cars, parading down the red carpet as photographers captured every moment. It was the kind of event where reputations were made or destroyed in a single night, where million-dollar deals were closed over glasses of champagne, where alliances and rivalries were forged in discreet hallways. Meghan arrived at exactly 9 p.m., alongside Beatrice Sterling, in a black chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce. When she stepped out of the car, there was a moment of silence among the photographers before the cameras began flashing frantically. Who was this stunning woman beside the powerful Beatrice? The blood-red gown she wore was from an exclusive Italian designer, with a cut that suggested sophistication and power without being vulgar. Her hair was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing a long neck adorned with a discreet but valuable diamond necklace. The high heels made her legs look even longer, and she walked with a confidence that made people turn to look. Beatrice was equally impressive in a black tailored suit with silver details, her grey hair impeccably styled, exuding the authority of someone who had built an empire from scratch. Together they were a formidable pair, and everyone at the event knew it. As they entered the museum, the whispers began. Who is she? Where did she come from? Why did Beatrice Sterling bring her as her guest? Speculation ran wild, each theory more elaborate than the last. The Grand Hall was decorated with contemporary art, illuminated by strategically placed spotlights. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and sophisticated canapés. In the center of the hall, a small stage was set for the auction that would take place later. Meghan recognized several familiar faces, people who had been present on that horrible night at the Metropolitan Club 3 years ago. Some looked at her with curiosity, but none showed any sign of recognition. She was a ghost from the past, resurrected in a form so different it was unrecognizable. And then she saw him. Rick Wallace was near the bar, talking to a group of businessmen. He had aged in the last few years. There were stress lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. The suit he wore was expensive, but Meghan noted with satisfaction that it was from last season's collection, a subtle sign that his finances weren't as healthy as he wanted everyone to believe. Beside him stood Jessica Vance, wearing a gold dress that was too tight and jewelry that was too flashy, looking like someone trying very hard to prove her worth. Meghan felt a flicker of emotion when she saw them for the first time, but it wasn't the devastating pain she had expected. It was something colder, more controlled. It was determination. She took a deep breath, remembering all the training, all the emotional immunization sessions, all the times Beatrice had told her that the best revenge isn't shouted but served cold and calculated. Beatrice sensed the tension in Meghan's shoulder and squeezed her arm lightly in a gesture of encouragement. Remember, you're the hunter now, not the prey. The auction began half an hour later. Meghan and Beatrice sat in a raised VIP area with a prime view of the stage and the other attendees. The auctioneer, an elegant man with a European accent, began presenting the pieces. The first lots were relatively modest, works by emerging artists, luxury decorative items. Meghan watched as the participants made their bids, studying each one's pattern, identifying who was there for a genuine interest in art and who was simply flaunting their wealth. Rick participated in a few early bids, but Meghan noticed he stopped bidding long before the final price, always letting others win. It was interesting behavior. He wanted to be seen participating, keeping up the appearance of prosperity, but he didn't have the capital to truly compete. Jessica, beside him, looked increasingly frustrated each time he dropped out of a bid, whispering something in his ear that clearly annoyed him. Trouble in paradise, Meghan thought with satisfaction. Then came the main lot of the evening. It wasn't a work of art, but a strategic commercial lot in the heart of Midtown, donated by an anonymous investor for the charity auction. The estimated value was $20 million, but everyone knew it could go much higher due to its prime location. Meghan had studied that property. She knew Rick had planned to build the new headquarters of Wallace Investments there, a project he had been announcing for months as proof that his company was thriving. Losing that lot would be a devastating blow to his plans. The bidding started with moderate offers, but quickly escalated. Rick entered the fray with determination, his voice growing louder with each bid. Meghan waited patiently, watching, calculating. When the price reached 25 million, only 3 bidders remained. Rick, a real estate mogul, and an unknown woman at the back of the room. When it hit 30 million, the real estate mogul dropped out. Rick was sweating visibly now, his forehead shining. Under the museum lights, the unknown woman bid 31 million. That's when Megan decided to enter. She calmly raised her paddle, her clear, confident voice echoing through the hall. 35 million. There was a collective gasp of surprise. All eyes turned to her, trying to identify this woman who had made such an aggressive bid. Rick turned to look, his eyes meeting hers for the first time in years. Megan held his gaze, not flinching, not blinking. She saw the confusion on his face, as if something familiar was nagging at his memory, but he couldn't quite place it. Jessica was also staring, her eyes narrowing with suspicion and envy. She whispered something to Rick, but he ignored her, completely focused on Megan. The auctioneer continued. "We have 35 million. Any advance?" The unknown woman at the back of the room dropped out. Rick hesitated, clearly doing mental calculations. Megan could almost see the gears turning in his head. He didn't have the resources to go much higher, but his pride wouldn't let him back down, especially after publicly announcing his plans for that property. 36 million. Rick's voice came out strained, forced. Megan waited a moment, letting the tension build in the room, then raised her paddle again. 40 million. The murmur in the hall turned into open exclamations of shock. It was an aggressive, final bid, clearly meant to end the contest. Rick turned pale. He looked at Jessica, who was shaking her head vehemently, and then at the businessmen around him seeking some kind of support that didn't come. The auctioneer counted. 40 million going once, 40 million going twice. Last chance. Rick opened his mouth as if to make another bid, but no sound came out. His bravado had hit its financial limit. Sold for 40 million to the lady in red. The gavel fell, sealing Rick's fate. Megan accepted Beatrice's congratulations with a discreet smile, but her eyes remained fixed on Rick. She saw the exact moment realization hit him, not just that he had lost the property, but that he had been financially humiliated in front of all his peers. After the auction, during the celebratory cocktail hour, Megan circulated through the room with Beatrice, being introduced to the top business leaders and opinion makers present. Beatrice introduced her simply as Megan Alves, a senior strategic consultant for Sterling Enterprises, without mentioning her past. Megan had decided to use her maiden name to avoid immediate recognition, though she knew someone would eventually make the connection. But not tonight. Tonight, she controlled the narrative. She spoke with politicians, foreign investors, heirs to old fortunes, and the new money crowd from tech startups. In every conversation, she demonstrated a deep knowledge of the market, a sharp strategic vision, and a natural charm that made people feel important and heard. Several people asked for her business card, interested in future collaborations. Megan was building her own power network, independent of Beatrice, though with her support. Inevitably, she came face to face with Rick. He had spent the last hour trying to approach her discreetly, clearly intrigued by this woman who had so decisively defeated him. When he finally got her alone in a quiet corner of the room, his first question was direct. "Have we met before? There's something about you that seems familiar." Megan took a sip of her champagne before answering, savoring the moment. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, Mr. Wallace, but I've certainly heard a lot about you. Your reputation precedes you." There was something in her tone, an almost imperceptible edge of sarcasm that made Rick frown. He studied her face intently as if trying to solve a puzzle. "Your perfume, it's familiar." Megan smiled, a small, controlled smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's a custom fragrance. Perhaps it reminds you of someone from your past. Sometimes our memories play tricks on us, especially when we try to forget things we'd rather not remember." Before Rick could respond, Jessica appeared, grabbing his arm possessively. "Rick, darling, they're waiting for us for the official photo of the main donors." She looked Megan up and down with poorly disguised disdain. "Who's your new friend?" Rick made the introductions mechanically, and Megan extended her hand to Jessica with cold politeness. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Wallace." Jessica shook her hand with unnecessary force, trying to establish dominance. "Actually, we're not officially married yet, but soon." Megan noticed the tension in Jessica's voice, the need to mark her territory. It was obvious their relationship was far from stable. "My congratulations in advance, then," Megan replied, in a tone that could be interpreted as sincere or ironic, depending on one's perspective. "And good luck with your business, Mr. Wallace. I imagine losing that property wasn't in your plans. I'm sure you'll find alternatives." She walked away before he could respond, leaving them with the subtle sting of her observation. Beatrice met her near the exit. "How do you feel?" Megan thought for a moment before answering. "Like I'm waking up from a long nightmare. He didn't recognize me, Beatrice. He looked right at me and didn't see who I was." Beatrice nodded. "Because you are no longer who you were. And that, my dear, is the greatest power you could ever have over him. He's trying to solve a mystery he'll never figure out, because the woman he knew no longer exists." In the days following the auction, Megan began to appear more and more at New York high society events, exclusive dinners, gallery openings, private rooftop parties, always alongside Beatrice or other important business leaders, always impeccable, always impressive. Her name began to circulate in the right circles, and with it came invitations to business meetings, partnership proposals, and genuine interest in her opinions and insights. Meanwhile, Megan and Beatrice were working behind the scenes on a much larger plan. They had discovered that Rick was desperate for capital to cover his mounting debts and keep the company afloat. He had joined the consortium trying to block Beatrice not for any real strategy, but because the other members had promised to inject money into his company. But that promise depended on the consortium's success in stopping Sterling Enterprises' expansion. If the consortium failed, Rick would be left without the financial rescue he desperately needed. Beatrice had devised a brilliant plan. She began to discreetly acquire, through shell companies, all of Rick's personal and corporate debts. Bank loans, debts to suppliers, various financial commitments. Every time an institution wanted to offload the credit risk that Rick represented, one of Beatrice's companies was there, offering to buy that debt for a reasonable price. In a matter of weeks, Beatrice controlled virtually all of Rick's financial life without him knowing. In parallel, Megan was tasked with a more subtle mission. She needed to further infiltrate Rick and Jessica's social circle, gain their trust without revealing her identity, and identify any skeletons in the closet that could be used as leverage. It was a delicate game of approach and manipulation, and Megan discovered she had a natural talent for it, perhaps because she had spent years observing that world from the outside, studying its patterns and behaviors like an anthropologist studying a distant tribe. The perfect opportunity arose when Megan was invited to a private party at the penthouse of one of the consortium members. Rick and Jessica would be there, as well as other important business figures. Megan arrived alone this time. Beatrice had deliberately stayed away to let Megan shine on her own. The apartment was spectacular, with panoramic city views and decor that probably cost more than most houses. Rick saw her as soon as she entered, and Megan noticed he couldn't take his eyes off her. There was something in his posture that reminded her of how he used to look at her in the first few months of their relationship, before routine and boredom set in. But this wasn't the submissive, eager-to-please Megan he had known. This was a woman who emanated her own power, who needed no one's validation, and that was infinitely more attractive to a man like Rick, who always wanted what he couldn't have. During the party, Megan skillfully maneuvered conversations to always be near Rick and Jessica, but never too obviously. She listened to their conversations, memorized details, noted the unspoken tensions between them. Jessica was clearly insecure about her relationship with Rick, constantly seeking reassurance that he rarely provided. Rick, in turn, seemed increasingly obsessed with finding out who Megan really was and why she seemed so familiar. At the end of the night, when most of the guests had left, Rick finally got a moment alone with Megan on the terrace. The city pulsed below them, millions of lights twinkling in the darkness. "I need to know who you are," he said bluntly, standing closer to her than was appropriate. "I can't get you out of my head. Since that auction, it's like I know you from somewhere, but I can't remember where. Megan turned to look him directly in the eye, allowing herself a moment of cruel satisfaction. Sometimes, the people who made the biggest mark on us are the ones we choose to forget, Mr. Wallace. Perhaps your memory is trying to protect you from something you'd rather not face. She walked away before he could ask more questions, leaving him alone on the terrace with his growing doubts and confusion. That night, upon returning home, Megan found Michael awake, waiting for her. The 3-year-old boy ran into her arms, and she hugged him tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of his freshly washed hair. "Mommy looked pretty?" he asked, with the sincerity of a child. Megan smiled, one of the few genuine expressions she had allowed herself that night. "Yes, I did, my love. And you know what else? Mommy is doing a very important job. A job that will make sure you have everything you deserve and never have to go through the hardships we went through." The boy nodded, not fully understanding but trusting his mother completely. As she put Michael to bed, Megan reflected on how far she had come, from that desperate, broken woman on the sidewalk outside the Metropolitan Club to this powerful, feared executive. But she also knew the journey wasn't over. The final confrontation was approaching, and she needed to be prepared for the moment Rick finally discovered the truth, because he would eventually. And when that happened, Megan wanted to ensure she was in complete control of the situation, that he was so entangled in her web that he would have nowhere to run. Revenge wasn't just about making him pay for what he did. It was about making sure he understood exactly what he had lost and could never get back. The meeting that would decide everything was scheduled for a Monday morning. Beatrice had summoned Rick and the other consortium members for a negotiation she described as an opportunity to find common ground before things escalated into a full-blown corporate war. Rick, desperate for any chance to solve his growing financial problems, accepted immediately. He didn't know he was walking straight into a meticulously constructed trap. Beatrice's office on the 30th floor of the Sterling Tower was designed to intimidate. Glass walls offered a 360-degree view of New York City, reminding all visitors of the vastness of the empire Beatrice had built. The conference table was made of black Italian marble, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than a compact car. Everything in the room communicated power, success, and the ability to crush anyone who stood in the way. Rick arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Jessica and 2 lawyers. Megan watched on the office security camera, noting how he nervously adjusted his tie, how Jessica compulsively checked her makeup in the reflection of the windows. They were trying to look confident, but the facade was fragile. The other consortium members arrived shortly after, a group of 5 middle-aged businessmen who clearly believed their numbers gave them the upper hand. Beatrice greeted them with the cool courtesy that was her trademark, indicating their seats at the table. Megan entered the room last, carrying a folder of documents. She wore an impeccable grey suit, her hair loose in perfect waves over her shoulders, a presence of quiet authority. Rick recognized her immediately, his face lighting up with a mix of surprise and satisfaction. "Ah, the mysterious consultant. A pleasure to have you here as well. Perhaps now we can have a real conversation." Megan sat next to Beatrice, placing the folder on the table without a word. Her silence was more unsettling than any words could be. Beatrice began the meeting by explaining her proposal. She was willing to drop some of her planned expansions in exchange for the consortium disbanding, and each company going its own way. It seemed like a reasonable, even generous offer. The consortium members exchanged glances, clearly trying to find the trap they knew was hidden somewhere. But Rick was less focused on the negotiation details and more on Megan. He couldn't stop looking at her, trying to decipher the enigma she represented. During the coffee break, he cornered her by the window, away from the others. "I know we've met. I can't explain how, but I know. Please just tell me who you really are." Megan turned to him, for the first time allowing the mask of professionalism to shift slightly, revealing something more dangerous underneath. "Are you sure you want to know, Rick? Sometimes knowledge is a sentence, not a liberation." It was the first time she had used his first name without the formality of Mr. Wallace. Something in the familiarity of her tone, the specific inflection of her voice, hit Rick like a lightning bolt. His eyes widened, recognition beginning to form like a crack in glass. "No, it can't be." His voice came out as a strangled whisper. You disappeared. I looked for you. Where have you been?" Megan laughed, but it was a humorless laugh. "You looked for me? How interesting, rewriting history. If I recall correctly, you threw me out of my own life and blocked all my attempts to contact you. But don't worry, Rick, I've been exactly where you put me, at rock bottom, and that's where I learned how to climb back up." Rick turned pale, staggering slightly as if he'd been physically struck. "Megan, it's you. My God, you look so different. I didn't recognize you. You look incredible. Listen, about what happened, about that night I was under a lot of pressure and things got out of control and—" Megan held up a hand, cutting off the stream of pathetic excuses. "No, you don't get to do that. You don't get to turn your deliberate cruelty into a misunderstanding or a reaction to stress. You intentionally humiliated me, Rick. You chose your mistress over your pregnant wife, the mother of your child, in front of everyone we knew. That wasn't a mistake. It was a choice." Just then, Jessica re-entered the room, sensing the tension between them. "What's going on here, Rick? Who is this woman, really?" Rick opened his mouth to answer, but Megan beat him to it. "I'm Megan Wallace, or I was at least. Rick's ex-wife, mother of the son he barely knows, and now, ironically, the person who controls his future." Jessica was speechless for a moment, processing the information. Then her expression shifted from confusion to fury. "You? You're that pathetic woman he left? The one who cried and begged? Impossible." "Megan's not pathetic anymore, Jessica. In fact, she's probably the most powerful woman in this room right now, which must be particularly hard for you to accept." Beatrice appeared at the door, interrupting the moment. "I think it's time we get back to the meeting. We have a lot to discuss." They returned to the conference table, but the dynamic had completely changed. Rick was visibly shaken, his focus completely gone. Jessica was furious, shooting venomous glares at Megan at every opportunity. The other consortium members sensed something had happened, but they didn't know exactly what. That's when Megan opened the folder she had brought. "Gentlemen, before we continue with the negotiations, I believe it's important that everyone here understands the true financial situation of the consortium you're defending." She began distributing documents, copies of contracts, bank statements, audit reports. Each page revealed another secret, another lie, another fraud Rick had committed to maintain the appearance of success. Hidden loans, falsified financial reports, promises to investors he could never fulfill. The faces of the other businessmen changed as they read, from confusion to shock to anger. They had been deceived. Rick was not the solid partner he pretended to be. He was a house of cards about to collapse, and if they remained associated with him, they could be dragged down with him. "Wallace, what is the meaning of this?" one of the businessmen demanded, throwing the papers on the table. "You told us your company was in excellent financial shape." Rick tried to defend himself, but his words came out jumbled, desperate. "These documents are fake. They've been fabricated. This woman has a personal grudge against me. She's trying to destroy me." Beatrice intervened, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The documents are completely authentic, Mr. Wallace, and you know it. In fact, Sterling Enterprises is now the primary creditor for virtually all of your personal and corporate debts. We bought every loan, every debit, every financial obligation you had. You no longer owe money to banks or suppliers. You owe me, and I'm here to collect." The silence that followed was absolute. Rick looked from Beatrice to Megan and back, the full realization finally hitting him. He had been played, manipulated, and defeated at his own game. The other consortium members began to stand up, clearly wanting no part of the situation. "Sterling, if your offer to dissolve the consortium is still on the table, we accept. Wallace is on his own." They left quickly, leaving only Rick, Jessica, Megan, and Beatrice in the room. Jessica tried to get up too, but Rick grabbed her arm. "You're not going anywhere. We're in this together." Jessica shoved him away forcefully. "Together? You promised me we were partners, that we'd build an empire." All you've given me are debts and lies, and now your ex-wife, the woman you said was insignificant, is here showing she's 10 times the man you'll ever be. I'm out." She slammed the door on her way out, leaving Rick alone to face the two women who had orchestrated his downfall. Megan felt a pang of satisfaction watching Jessica abandon Rick in the same way he had abandoned her. Karma, it seemed, was real. Rick sank into his chair, the weight of defeat crushing his shoulders. "What do you want from me, Megan? You've already destroyed me. You've proven your point." Megan leaned across the table, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him flinch. "What do I want? I want you to understand what you lost. I want you to know that the son you never bothered to know is an incredible, intelligent, and loving child who will grow up knowing his father chose pride over family. I want you to spend the rest of your life looking in the mirror and seeing not the successful man you thought you were, but the coward you truly are. And most importantly, I want you to sign these papers." She pushed a set of documents across the table. "There are 2 sets. The first is the complete transfer of Wallace Investments to Sterling Enterprises. The second is the full and permanent relinquishment of all parental rights to Michael." Rick looked at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. "You can't do this. The company is my family's legacy, and Michael is my son." Megan smiled, but it was a smile as cold as ice. "I can, and I will. The alternative is that I hand over all the evidence of your financial fraud to the IRS and the SEC. You'll spend the next 10 years in a federal prison. Your choice, Rick, freedom in poverty or prison with your pride intact." Rick picked up the pen with trembling hands. Before signing, he looked at Megan one last time. "I did love you, you know, in the beginning, before everything got complicated." Megan shook her head slowly. "No, Rick. You loved the idea of me, the submissive woman who validated your ego, who never questioned your decisions, who made you feel important. You never really knew me, never wanted to. And now, the irony of it all, the woman I've become is everything you always pretended to be looking for. Strong, independent, successful, but you will never have access to this version of me." Rick signed the documents, each stroke of the pen seeming to drain more life from him. When he finished, he pushed the papers back and stood up. "I hope your revenge is worth it, Megan. I hope it brings you the peace you're looking for." Megan stood as well, maintaining her tall, dignified posture. "This isn't about revenge, Rick. It's about justice. It's about making sure men like you understand that you can't destroy people without consequences. And it's about ensuring my son grows up in a world where power doesn't come from crushing others, but from building something real." Rick walked out of the room without looking back, a broken man heading toward an uncertain future. Megan watched him go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. It wasn't the pure joy she had imagined. It was something deeper, more mature. It was closure. Beatrice came over, placing a hand on Megan's shoulder. "How do you feel?" Megan thought for a long moment before answering. "Free. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm truly free. From the past, from the pain, from the need to prove anything to anyone but myself." Beatrice smiled, a genuine, warm smile that rarely appeared. "That was the real goal of all this, Megan. Not to destroy your ex-husband, though that was a satisfying bonus. It was to free you from the emotional prison he had put you in. Now you can finally live the life you always deserved." In the weeks that followed, the changes were swift and dramatic. Wallace Investments was formally integrated into the Sterling conglomerate, with Megan taking over as Director of Operations for the new division. She cleaned up the company's questionable practices, restructured its finances, and began building something sustainable and ethical. Rick vanished from the New York social scene. Rumors said he had moved upstate, where he lived a simple, solitary life. Jessica tried to reinvent herself in another social circle, but her reputation as an opportunist preceded her. Megan became a respected and even admired figure in the American corporate world. She didn't hide her story. On the contrary, she used it as an example of resilience and rebuilding. She gave talks on female entrepreneurship, mentored other women going through difficult situations, and used her platform to advocate for changes in laws protecting single mothers and victims of domestic financial abuse. Michael grew up surrounded by love and security, with a mother who had turned her pain into power, her humiliation into purpose. One afternoon, 6 months after the final confrontation in Beatrice's office, Megan was in her own office, now a spacious, light-filled room overlooking Central Park. She was reviewing contracts when she received an unexpected text message. It was from Rick. It just said, "Thank you." Megan stared at the message for a long time, trying to understand its meaning. Thank you for what? For not destroying him completely? For forcing him to face his failures? For freeing him from a life of lies and appearances? She decided not to reply. Some conversations need to end for new ones to begin. Rick was part of her past now, a closed chapter she could revisit whenever she wanted, but she would never again be its prisoner. She deleted the message and went back to work, planning the company's next strategic acquisition, thinking about Michael's parent-teacher conference later, considering the dinner invitation she had received from an interesting entrepreneur she'd met at a conference last week. Her life was full of possibilities, of choices that were entirely her own, of a future she was building brick by brick with her own calloused hands that now wore Italian leather gloves but never forgot the weight of a mop. Megan had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Revenge may be sweet, but rebuilding is powerful. And true power doesn't come from crushing enemies, but from building a life so full and meaningful that your enemies become irrelevant. As the sun set over New York, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Megan closed her laptop and grabbed her purse. It was time to pick up Michael from school, time to hear about his day's adventures, time to make dinner together and laugh at kid jokes that only a parent would find funny. This was her real victory. Not the luxury office, not the corporate power, not Rick's downfall. It was the ability to love her son completely, to be present, to build memories that would never be stained by shame or regret. Megan looked out the window one last time, watching the city pulse below. New York, the city that had seen her break and now saw her thrive. The city where she had lost everything and then gained something even better. Not the old life she had tried to rebuild, but a new life, forged in the fire of adversity, tempered by Beatrice's mentorship, sharpened by the determination to never again be anyone's victim. She smiled to herself, grabbed her keys and walked out of the office. The future was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, she was excited to see it. The cycle had closed, not with violence or tragedy, but with transformation and renewal. Megan had entered that ballroom years ago as a woman defined by the man beside her. She left now as a woman defined only by herself, by her choices, by her strength, by her unconditional love for her son. And if there was one lesson in her entire journey, it was simple, but profound. The end of one story is just the beginning of another. And who writes that new story is entirely up to you.